if you can try and pitch a story in a way that broadens it out so more people can relate to it without trying to dilute the message itself, I think that's one of the ways that you can do it. But you can't do that all the time.
The hook totally needs to be in like the first paragraph of an email. If you can't get it in there and get people's attention in that way, then you probably don't have a very good story, to be honest.
No, just be nice. It's just basic human courtesy, right?
Hello and welcome to this latest episode of CommsCast with Jersey Road, where we want to equip you, the comms professional, to promote your message clearly and effectively in an ever-changing media landscape. My name's Flint. I'm Marketing and Comms Officer here at Jersey Road, and delighted to say I've got a couple of guests with me here because our topic today in the studio is going to be looking at how you can sell your story and pitch your story to the press, to the media. So to help me do that, I'm joined by Warren Nettleford next to me. He's with me in the studio. So Warren, you are a reporter and presenter for ITN.
That's
good
right.
to have you with us. How are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. We've had a nice little pre-game chat, haven't we?
We
So
have.
we've all got to know each other quite well. And joining us from the other side of the world, she stayed up very late for this one, so we're indebted to her. We have Ruth Lamperd with us, who is an account manager at Jersey Road Australia, our Australia branch of what we do. Ruth, thank you for staying up. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Really good, thanks. It's great to be here with you guys. So thanks for having me.
Pleasure. We're looking forward to this because we have almost a bit of a boxing match going on. So we've got broadcast represented here on the sofa. So Warren's going to be speaking from the broadcast point of view. And obviously, Ruth, a lot of your experience, and we'll get into that, is to do with print media. And you've made a recent decision to move more into the comms and PR space, which is what's brought you to Jersey Road. So loads to talk through. Really excited to have you both here with us. And so the big question is, we're talking about pitching stories and how we can equip all these people who are watching and listening to best position their stories to people like you, Warren, pretty much with your hat on with ITV. So let's just start, Warren, with what you do. Yeah. Could you give us a bit of a background of your history, your broadcast experience, and what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So I right now work for ITV News, one of the major news broadcasters in the UK. I have been there doing this current role for about 2 years now, and my job involves presenting mainly on a new news service of ours called ITVX. It's a new on-demand news service. More and more people are choosing not to watch TV news or the TV in the same way. I often ask my friends, when was the last time you turned on your TV and watched it in a linear fashion?
Yeah. And
people look at me blankly and say, what's that? Even more so when I speak to younger people, because they just don't have that hinterland history, whatever, of watching the news with their parents. They're just used to logging onto YouTube or logging onto an app on their smart TV. And so ITV have been trying to reposition themselves in that sense by having a new news service, which is kind of trying to cater to that new audience. So I've been working on that for 2 years. Before that, I guess from the beginning, I started my career as a news trainee after doing my undergraduate degree in history and politics, then doing a postgrad in journalism. I was a trainee at Channel 4 News. And then after Channel 4, I moved to the BBC as a producer and became a reporter. And then after that, I moved to Channel 5 News. It's about 8 or 9 years ago now, where I was presenting or anchoring some of their shorter bulletins throughout the course of the day. And then a few years ago, I started my own company making TV commercials and other things. And then I do ITV News at the same time. So I'm kind of always busy doing lots of different things.
Sounds very busy. You've gone around the houses a bit. You've done your ITV, done your Channel 5, bit of BBC in there. You know what you're doing at this point.
Maybe there's nowhere left for me to go. And I've been found out. No. They all seem to like me for some reason. So yeah, but it's been really great getting that experience of working with different newsrooms, because later on I'm sure we'll talk about the different things newsrooms want or the different audiences that they serve. So it's been really useful for me to kind of get a real broad understanding of the news ecosystem, I think you can call it, in the UK.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, just for context, because we're going to hit on that a bit more about what you said about obviously going digital and everyone now moving on to different forms of media. So we'll park that for a second. Ruth, just to bring you in, give us a bit of background on what you've been doing. And obviously, as I said, you're now with Jersey Road Australia. What's your background?
So most recently, coming over from into Jersey Road, most recently for the previous sort of 6 or so years, I was working in an INGO in sort of aid and development sector. So in the comms space initially, and then working then in with the policy and advocacy section, who were sort of like running campaigns to try and bring about public policy change. Usually through my experience, I worked in that sort of a context, sort of using my experience, understanding how the public digested things, I suppose, through the mainstream media. So that was a really great experience for me too. But before then, sort of the majority of my career, ever since I stepped out of high school, basically, was in firstly a cadetship and a little regional newspaper where I kind of learnt the beat. You know, I did everything from a chook show through to a murder court case, a murder trial.
Wow.
And local politics, right through to interviewing the Prime Minister at one particular point. I actually can't remember much about that interview. I was so nervous. So I think we can discount that. Then I went up to Queensland and worked for 4 years up there in Brisbane, sort of at the Courier Mail, which is a News Limited publication. Sort of learnt a few more things, learnt probably what I didn't know the most up in that particular place. I had a lot to learn, I realised. And then down to the Herald Sun in Melbourne, which was, at the time when I moved there, it was the biggest, I think one of the biggest selling newspapers in Australia. It had a very, very seriously mainstream Australia kind of readership. So it actually taught me a lot about what worked as far as how to tell a story, how to get the attention of a story that really needed it, what elements it needed to get into the pages. So yeah,
that's excellent, Ruth. And you've hit the nail on the head there. We're all about for the next 20 minutes or so, just how can we tell good stories? What makes a good story? Warren and I have already chatted about that a little bit off air as well. And that's the key question, really. If people are watching or listening, I suppose we really want to equip people to think, okay, I've got a story. I feel like my organization is doing great things, but how do I make sure that equates to the media publications, someone like Warren, what's actually going to appeal to that demographic, to my supporters, whoever that is. So Ruth, just throwing it back to you, in terms of the broad media landscape, what would you say in your experience are some of the changes or maybe some of the trends you've seen in media consumption, the way people are pitching, interacting with the media over the past few years? Anything stand out for you?
Oh, look, the biggest thing from my perspective when I'm looking in on newsrooms, they're smaller, and that has very real impacts on the journalists. I mean, they've got to work faster and harder, and it actually means that anything that anyone from the outside wanting to pitch into them can do to make their news gathering easier is almost always very welcome. So they often don't have time to respond to personal emails occasionally, even personal ones. So it's you've got to be thick-skinned on the outside a little bit because and really understand the stresses that journos are actually under these days. And look, stories, is certainly in the print area, stories that have the ability to secure like online hits will be prioritised. You know, the trick is to just make sure, make the difference you want to make, but sort of make sure that print and broadcast get what they need to engage their audience more than ever. You know, we have to be really thinking about what they need as well. So there's a sweet spot, you know, something that works for us and something that works for them, and we've just got to find it. So
yeah, fascinated to know. Just naturally, I think the differences will come out culturally from talking about Australia, moving into US markets here in the UK. Warren, from your standpoint, what would you say you've noticed in the media consumption changes?
Well, when it comes to the amount of time people watch TV news now compared to even 15 years ago when I first started out, people are watching a lot less TV news bulletins, watching for fewer minutes. I think the last Ofcom news survey found that I think 16 to 24-year-olds only spend around 2 minutes a day, if that, watching TV news, which is way down compared to people who are in their 50s and 60s. I had a conversation with one of the senior editors in TV news a while ago, and he was telling me that the average age of the viewer for BBC Breakfast, which is kind of like, you know, the main breakfast news show in the UK, is 67 average age. And for Good Morning Britain, it's 56. So it's very much an aging audience, and it's not being replenished with. I mean, do you watch Good Morning Britain or BBC Breakfast?
So I do occasionally, but most of the time, actually, I used to do it a lot more in the last few years. I've then gone to just the apps on my phone, and I still go to the main outlets. BBC is still my friend in that regard. I'm not one of those TikTokers who will just look for an influencer for my news. But yeah, I've definitely moved off just sitting in front of my TV. Yeah. I'll do it much more on the move now.
Exactly. So that's the problem facing editors and program makers and creators, really, because people just aren't seeing the TV news bulletin as being the default place to go to for high quality news. The levels of trust which people have in TV news have decreased. And I think we're now in this kind of like multi-platform, multipolar world when it comes to news and ideas of what truth is, and people not really believing what they're seeing on news bulletins anymore. Then you've got fake news and disinformation into the mix as well. So there's this, I don't know, an increasing market of ideas when it comes to news, and then even what news is, which makes it even more difficult for the major players to put out news stories which audiences want or like. So they're the changes, really, and editors now and owners of news channels are having to compete or trying to understand this new world.
It does feel, Ruth, doesn't it, that we've got to the point now where we're not surprised anymore by the shift. We all know the impact of that digital dynamic, don't we? That people are now getting their news from all different amateur channels. They might go online on their social media just as much as going on Sky News or the other apps. Do you see that from a print point of view? In my mind, I'd think, oh, maybe that's a threat to print, whereas maybe broadcast, video first, that might play into their hands a bit more. Is that founded, or are there equal opportunities in that change of dynamic?
I think that is absolutely one of the battles that print has been having. Absolutely. And it's, I think to a degree, there's a yes and a no with that. So the yes is that, of course, something which it is like the content which broadcasters are putting out has always naturally been able to sort of shift onto an online environment. So yeah, absolutely. But I think print is increasingly shifting. So the people with the skill sets that they're actually getting in there have the visual skill sets as well as not just being wordsmiths and investigators or whatever it is that what each individual journalist does in their round. So, for example, they'll have video and animated explanatory graphics that they used to be sort of like the domain when I first started of an ABC or a BBC or some of the other commercial TV stations. So yes, so there is an extension though. So there is a will to extend into that. I think there's a lot of we can't discount the fact that some of the print journalist sort of skill set will enable them to dig a bit deeper into some of the issues and also where the way that they can present it. So there is absolutely still a place for it. How publications actually find their way to make their to continue their reach into the audience is it something for them, I think, but also whatever they produce can be reproduced into social media, I suppose, posts and so on, so that it can actually sort of still extend further out beyond just the publication's sort of like circulation or reach or readership. So yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think probably my experience has been that if print publications, when they've put together something which has been well researched, well thought out, has a lot of I suppose examples of the issue, whatever they're tackling, will actually reach very deeply into to change hearts and minds of politicians, for example, who do often still get clippings put on their desk in the mornings. So I think it still has a place, but you're right, it shifts. I don't think people should be threatened by it. I think we need to use everything that's there and utilise it as much as we can, and then share it through social channels.
Yeah. Yeah, so Warren, you've already touched on the fact that ITV have kind of pivoted to address the fact that everything is now diluted, it's online. How does that affect you just day to day? And yeah, what are you doing? What's ITV doing to make the most of that? Because I'm guessing you see an opportunity in that.
Yeah, well, I guess in terms of what we're doing, I mean, I mentioned ITVX where I'm working at the moment, and also um, when it comes to ITVX, we offer, I guess, podcasts as well, which we film like this. So there's an option to listen to the content as well as to view it. We do like longer extended interviews, which you can see there. We offer documentaries too. It's the advantage of being on demand, I guess. You can and being in control of that, you can have as little or as much as you want in terms of news offerings. And then, as well as that, we are trying to reach other audiences. We have a youth focused news show called The Rundown, which you can get on TikTok and other news platforms as well. So younger people can see the news presented to them in what I think ITV would call a more accessible kind of format. So they're the things that they're doing format wise to try and reach audiences. In terms of formulating stories, then you've got the tried and tested methods. You've got the contacts which the journalists have. You then have the newsroom responding to events. So be that a natural disaster, something happening,
Yeah.
A government event. There are things in the diary which we know are going to be happening, which we respond to. Special investigations. All those things are there as well. But of course, and this has been true for the past 10, 15 years now, social media itself is a good place to find news stories, a good place to get extra content in to supplement or augment the stories that you're doing. So be that user generated video content, which someone may have filmed, at an event. Let's take the riots, which happened in the UK from the end of July into early August, which kind of spread following the tragic murders of those young girls in Southport, and then rippled around the country. There was lots of user content of people filming rioters doing, criminal acts potentially, if convicted, which fed into the coverage and which helped the coverage too. So those different ways of finding stories, getting stories, using it on screen, and which sometimes those bits of content, if they're verified and are helpful, can be really good for just getting new stories out there.
That's really interesting. And I'm thinking for people watching or listening to this, they may be saying, great, tell me about those faith-based stories. So that's what they're thinking in terms of what's going to dominate the pitches that they're doing, and all their media relations is, my organization is doing great stuff. What about the faith-based angle? For you at ITV, what's your experience? What's the feeling and the cultural moment right now with faith-based angles on stories? Do they do well? Are they not doing particularly well? Are there certain terms or topics that break?
So I'm thinking one of our correspondents, Shihab Khan, he did a story about his own personal journey of going to Mecca, and that was then turned into a special on assignment, which is like a ITV News, kind of like current affairs program, lasted about half an hour, and he spoke about his journey going to Mecca and filming there as well. Now, when it comes to doing, I guess that's like a one-off, a special story. I haven't seen us do one like that from a Christian perspective, but I can't really think of as to what you would do in the same kind of Christian context. Maybe you go to Israel. I don't know. There's not the same kind of tradition, is there, where you can pinpoint to and say the one should be the same. But when it comes, I always say this, I give advice, when it comes to kind of pitching a faith-based story, you've got to bear in mind, I guess, the cultural context of the UK. It's unlike America. I'm not sure it's like in Australia, Ruth, but it's unlike the US, where, even though there is a clear separation between church and state in the US, very clear, it is still very much kind of like the default place is Christianity. And I say that even if you don't go to church, people wouldn't bat an eyelid if an NFL player thanked God in an interview. Or spoke about their personal faith. It would just be part of it. It's fine. In the UK, I think there's a real, just because of our culture, there's a real apprehension to do that. And I think that's true as well in news stories. I'd say news editors maybe are just a bit like, I'm not sure how we react to that, or what we can do to tell that story, or this this kind of like, I don't know, what do you call it now when it comes to you call it the ick.
Yeah.
That's used in dating.
Yeah.
But the ick, I think, when it comes to Christian stories and how to deal with them. So the advice I always give is just to build a personal relationship with the people who are making the choices when it comes to those news stories. So when you come to someone out of the blue, they won't just be like, "Oh, crikey, what's this Christian doing?" They'll know who you are. You'll be able to put in some kind of context as to why this story is important. I remember giving some advice a while ago to someone from this Christian think tank called Theos.
Yeah.
And they wanted some advice about a story which I thought was really interesting. And it was about how London was a real outlier compared to the UK when it came to Christianity. And it was a more conservative Christian place than anywhere else in the UK. And that was mainly due to, I think this researcher was saying, and they can correct me if I'm wrong on this, that was them saying it's because of the high levels of immigration in London and of the large number of Pentecostal churches and the large number even of like Eastern European churches from Polish communities, where people will be outwardly expressing their faith in those churches in a very different way than we're used to, perhaps. And that to me was really interesting because it's not just a Christian story, it's also a social history story. And you can make it relevant to people who aren't even Christian and say, oh wow, London's different. And I think if you can try and pitch a story in a way that broadens it out so more people can relate to it without trying to dilute the message itself, I think that's one of the ways that you can do it. But there are, you can't do that all the time.
Yeah, that's really helpful advice. Ruth, how does that resonate with you from an Australian context?
Yeah, it sounds very familiar, and that's really, I think we probably are quite equal on the way that media approaches faith-based stories. I think there are actually moments when faith will land and the Christian message will land, and overwhelming times of grief is one of them, and those times of the year that we wouldn't be there without Christianity. They wouldn't be there without Christianity, for example, Easter and Christmas, really. So there's always moments there, but there's a lot of moments in between as well, which is obviously where we're trying to focus on a little bit. In my experience, people who do it best, those that get a lot of traction, they are talking about what is right and what is moral, and the conscience of a nation, for example. They're talking about values which are Christian values at the heart, and also considered to be positive values in our society, which is generosity and kindness, and things that are sort of absolutely at the heart of our faith. So what Jesus stood for rather than the being of Jesus. So if you're talking around those terms, then it is possible to actually find a way into some mainstream sort of news outlets, stories of sacrifice and triumph. As a bit of an aside as well, someone said to me at one point, I don't really like the news. We're always focusing on the negative. Why is it such a negative place? And I said, actually, I disagree with that. I don't know if this would be held up if I was to analytically look through everything, but I like to think that 10% of the news that is the 10% of really extraordinarily good stories will make it into a media outlet sometimes, and the 10% of the really bad stuff will also make it in there. And there are stories that the faith-based organisations have that they want to tell that fall into those two cohorts, where you're talking about extreme poverty, for example, or you're talking about extreme generosity. So we've got the two ends of the scale. You just have to make sure that we don't dwindle the story down into the middle 80%, when the story probably won't get a run. And I think it's possible, but it's very hard, and you have to find the way to actually to actually just be able to engage people, make them feel, so that they understand there's a reason why they're reading this.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And it's just great to just talk through and discuss those differences, because of course, we're not just a monolith of cultures and nations, and there will be very different landscapes. So that's just really helpful to get from both of you really in your context. So let's drill down into the specific practicalities then of the pitching, the storytelling, maybe some practical things people can take away and actually go and implement that'll make them feel a little bit better about their amazing stories that they love internally. Warren, for you, receiving pitches, are there certain things that you would characterize as, I look out for X, this is what marks a good pitch, a strong pitch? What would you say?
Well, as a journalist, as Ruth was saying, you're time poor. So you want to know what the story is straight away. You want like a top line. What is it you're trying to tell me? Why is it important? And why do you think it's relevant to your audience or to my audience at ITV? So even before you're pitching a story, make sure you've got those things clear in your mind and have an understanding as to what are the kind of stories that regularly appear on ITV. Of course, if it's a TV news story, which is the more difficult thing to pitch for compared to print, because we need pictures, we need to see things, we need a case study we can, film, or we need an event we can film at. There need to be parts of the story which can be told visually. So think about that. Then when it comes to, if it's, why is it important? Are there facts and figures which are new and aren't from somewhere else? And are you giving me an exclusive look at something which will, spark interest? So those are the things to think about initially. And sometimes if there's someone I don't know and they come with a really good story, then then often you will go for it. But sometimes you won't, because there are so many things which can determine whether or not a story makes it. Someone may have a great story one day, but then it may be on that day the Southport murders happen. It may be that the Queen dies, the King dies. So it can be luck sometimes, that why a story makes it and why it doesn't appear on air. But it's about, the most important thing is just having a relationship with the news content creators, so they can trust you, and that they're a quantity who are reliable and that they're reputable. Now they're the main things to bear in mind really when pitching a story, to be clear as to what the story is. If there are facts and figures, is there a case study, is it right for my audience? And sometimes I will tell people, if it's not quite right for us, I say, look, this isn't right for us, but you should try these guys, and I'll help them get it on. Go to 4, go to 5, go to the BBC, go to somewhere else. Ruth, you were saying something really interesting actually just now regarding tolerance or poverty or the extremes, and where I think there is a real growth opportunity for Christians to appear on air is programs are changing in the UK on television because they're having to be made more cheaply. In some ways, they're becoming more like this in terms of it being a podcast on TV. So if you think about Newsnight, a show which used to be known for doing real kind of like investigative kind of like content with reporters around the world and several news pieces in the program. Now it's pretty much like this, where you'll have guests on the show who can offer insight or a perspective on a particular issue. And so those guest bookers now at, say, Newsnight or other places, or GB News or wherever, that's a really good place to try and get a foothold and then to build a presence. So, that person who's a Christian or who's an expert on poverty or an expert on something else can then get a foothold in the media and build a presence up based on these appearances.
Right. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I was just struck for a moment there that I think most of the conversations we have as an agency, and Ruth, you'll know a little bit about this as well, is that the clients, the organizations we work with, faith-based organizations, naturally you're passionate about your mission, you're passionate about what you're doing. And so you just cannot imagine why anyone else would not want to promote your story, because it's your heart, isn't it? It's your sweet spot, it's your cause. And I think we're always trying to help people to objectively take themselves out of it, the emotion, and think, okay, as you've said, does this match ITV's audience? Is this what Warren is looking for? Have you had previous conversations where he specifically said, this is how I need it packaged, or we need this spokesperson, I need a live event, something like that? So on that score, is there anything people can be doing, and both of you can answer this, to almost objectify their stories? Because it's it's painful pitching and constantly getting a no, but is there anything that can almost quality control people's stories from within, rather than everyone just saying, oh yeah, it's a great story, let's go? What do you think, Ruth?
I think absolutely you need to sit down and look at it as though someone from the outside would be looking at it, but it's very hard to do, even though, I mean, I've even found it myself with a couple of stories that I've been looking at and going, oh yeah, that's an awesome story, but I've been in the, an INGO for quite a long time, and I think in that context now, so I have to go, actually, no, now let's pull myself out of this. I think probably a really good way of doing this is to, if you've got a particular journalist that you're actually interested in running the story, a particular publication, you've got a relationship with them because you treat them properly, you respect them, understand that most journalists are really good people. I'm not just saying that because Warren's there. Look, 99.9%. They're actually there to try and make a difference and do something good. So if you've got those relationships and you're actually going, look, got this thought about a pitch, I think this is a really good story. I think there's a little seed in here that might work for you. What do you need to make this work? For example, is there time to actually have that conversation with them? What do you need to make this work? What am I missing? Is there something that you think would really work if you're having that actual conversation with them? So actually working, you know exactly what it takes, but actually try and, no offense, Warren, I'm not trying to play you here, but but you actually do have that conversation. You legitimately do want to hear what they've got to say. I've just had a recent conversation actually with a journalist who said, you know what, if we wanted to try and get that one around, I need this and this. And I go, yep, that's no problems. And the reason why they have a better insight is because they know what their editor's wanting this week. And actually, I'm going to say, Warren, you did completely trigger me there for a little moment when you were talking about the Queen dying, and the number of times there's been a Queen die or there's been an election called and it's thrown a story. There's actually twice when I've had two stories that I've been working on for months actually, and they were ready to be run on the Sunday and they just got piffed off the front page. And that is quite soul destroying for a journalist, and probably even more so if it had been a piece that had been pitched in from an outside organisation, and they would go, oh, I thought that was such a great yarn, why didn't it get a good run? It is just the wiles of the way the industry works, I suppose. So on the one hand, step back and have a look at the piece and say, well, how is this going to work, and actually legitimately get the advice of the journalist sometimes if that's what you need. And then also being prepared to go, okay, I've just got to let it go and say, well, this is how the universe wanted to treat this one this time, So I think probably as well, being really trustworthy. I think it's really important that as someone who deals with journalists, you actually need to be trustworthy yourself. Don't be an Indian giver. Don't go along and go, I've got this great story, and you've actually pitched it individually to 5 other journos just to see who gets it in there most quickly. You really do have to be sincere in what you're offering and make sure you don't move on to somebody else to pitch it to them if someone else is still working on it. So it's just, they're under the journos, Warren, I'm sure they're under the pump, would be, as with any of the journalists out there, to get, sort of exclusive stories up and, helping them get those exclusives will get the story a better run.
Yeah, it's kind of the paradox of Christian message and the paradox of news, I suppose, in that the world doesn't want to know. so it's difficult kind of, and we know, if you're a Christian, we know what the Bible says about that. The world doesn't want to know about Jesus in the way that we would want people to know. And then you've got to throw that into the fact that we're in a news environment where maybe faith-based stories aren't the most important thing on the news agenda. So it's kind of like this delicate balancing act of trying to pitch the stories, but being prepared for the knockbacks.
Yeah, and good word in there when you said obviously the world doesn't want to know. I think that's where Ruth's advice comes in where if you can hit those values, like the morality values that we can all get around as human beings of forgiveness, love, peace, people like those stories. And so I'd encourage lots of organizations, clients with that they are doing so much good. They're all doing such good, and of course it doesn't always fit what the media needs, but I think there's definitely a message there of really focusing on those things that are going to unite people, give us positivity, give us forgiveness. People do like to receive those stories of hope and not just constantly told what's going wrong with the country. So I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. Warren, I'm just curious, in terms of how people approach you, does it matter? In terms of mode of pitching, do people not help themselves with how they approach you, the way they talk to you, when, or does it not really bother you?
No, just be nice. I mean, it's just basic human courtesy, right? I mean, if someone isn't going to be nice, then you're not going to want to be nice back, and naturally. So I don't mind how people message me if they do so on like social media or on my email or through the website. I don't mind, as long as people are just courteous, clear, tell me why they think I'd be interested, and I can see if I can help.
And in terms of email versus phone call versus, hey Warren, I'd like to take you for a coffee or take you out for dinner, obviously you are very busy. Is there a way people should be even thinking about how they approach you, whether it's an email on top of your 1,000 emails or don't disturb you, the phone call?
If they've got my number somehow, then I don't mind.
So they shouldn't have.
They shouldn't have. How have they got that? But the email's fine. And look, you emailed me twice the other day, and I didn't respond to you because I was busy. But you persisted, and that's the key thing. If someone persists, then I'm going to pay attention. And I've had that a few times where you just get inundated with so many emails, and you say, yes, I'm going to get back to you. I'm going to get back to you. But if they really just persist and they're still kind with it, oh, you didn't see this, and they go, oh, yes, I apologize. You've got my attention. I don't mind if someone says, I'll probably, because I get asked so many times, I'll probably only go for a coffee if I think the story is a serious story, because there's loads you can do on the phone. All right. I mean, you can have a quick chat on the phone, then think, okay, well, let's have a coffee as well. So I think a message, a few emails, maybe a coffee, and then that's how it gets always for me.
And Ruth, I'm guessing to put the hook in the fourth paragraph of the email is not going to go very well. So as Warren said, getting that impact statement at the top, not messing about. You really need to grab journalist attention, especially in 2024 when everyone's so busy.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, my experience is you really need to be able to get the pitch sort of, and the hook totally needs to be in like the first paragraph of an email. If you can't get it in there and get people's attention in that way, then you probably don't have a very good story, to be honest. And if you've got, the thing is, though, I mean, there may be some more extra information, which is really also very cool, and you really don't want to let go of, and you want to actually sort of say, well, this is another reason why this would be awesome for you to be doing this. You can sort of have, look, I've put extra info below if you're interested in some stats or a study or something like that. So then you can, so that the attention can be grabbed in the first little, literally half a screen of an email, I'd say. A query email I find as well sometimes too. Like, I've got an idea, like just a journal, I've got an idea and I think it would work really well for your program. Do you think it would interest you? The hook still has to be in that query, but it's sort of approaching it a little bit more as sort of like a question. You've kind of got to get them in and they've got to ask for it then, but obviously you don't give away too much at the start, but then if they have an interest, then you obviously can go in there and give them more. But obviously you still need to be able to give enough and respect the time as well. I've got some former journalist friends who sometimes do something a little bit tricky, which I've never actually experimented with it myself, but they bury the lead in the media release, like right down the bottom. So,
why?
Sorry?
Why?
Well, so that they figure that if someone reads down far enough and they find it, then the journalist who loves a story and thinks that no one else is going to have noticed it will think, this is an awesome story, I'm going to actually go with that. I don't know if it's ever worked, but if anyone does, they should email me and let me know, because
Warren's not buying it.
No, there you go. Well, it wouldn't work for you. You don't read down that far, do you? I can tell into the media release.
No.
Yeah, that's right. No, it's look, sometimes as well. Look, sometimes you just need to get to the facts, and something that comes across too polished, people won't feel like that it's necessarily there to be written, that it's all just sort of prepared and everyone else is going to get the same thing, and it'll just be a homogenous sort of piece going out, depending on what it is. Obviously, there's so many different forms of media releases about so many different subjects, and it can vary from sort of like case to case. But then there are sometimes polished releases for, say, industry publications or magazines, and they will run it word for word because they don't have that time. It's just not there. In Australia, certainly in regional media, you can have grabs, like audio grabs attached. They can be scripted. You can sort of attach them, sort of record them on your phone and convert them from, I think, MP4 to MP3 and just send them out. And often you'll get regional stations and various other, very high turnover news outlets that will actually just pick them up. So it gives you a chance to put your juicy, good turn of phrase in, and you just never know. You're like in a big country.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you, Ruth. We'll wrap up there, but just final word to you, Warren. Just a word on spokespeople. Obviously, you've mentioned about the need for that to be clear, and we've spoken to journalists before who've said if you're going to put a spokesperson down, they need to be able to pick up their phone, commit to a slot, turn up, give us what we need, be prompt. Just maybe give us a couple of basics with how to choose your spokespeople and how to do that well for you from the other side.
Yeah, I think all those things are true. What I'd say when they arrive, always they should make sure that they're across the news agenda of the day. So they may have been invited on to speak about a specific subject, but it may well be something else has broken during the day which is relevant or adjacent to that particular subject. And if they've got a line on it or some insights on that as well, that will be helpful for the reporter. Also bear in mind, a reporter often will be working on several stories in the same day, and they may be like the 10th or 12th person they've interviewed, right? And so they shouldn't be offended sometimes if the reporter comes down maybe a bit frazzled and they're not across all the detail of their particular story, because they've got so many different things to juggle and they've got deadlines to contend with as well. So there's some things to bear in mind. And just for the contributor or the spokesperson, just for them to be confident in what they're going to say, not to memorize line by line what the line they want to give. That is the absolute worst for a journalist. And you'll put their backs up a bit if they come in and just say, I'm only saying this. It's like, well, I can't use it then, can I? Because I need you to answer the question that I'm giving to you. So for them to be flexible in how they think, how they approach things, and also just to kind of enjoy the process. The reason why they're there is because we are seeing them as being the expert. We want the viewers or the listeners, the readers, to hear from you. So, just enjoy the experience.
Yeah, that's so helpful. There's been so much good insight in these last few moments. So thank you very much, Warren, for being with us. Really appreciate it. So much good advice. Ruth, thank you so much. It's bedtime now.
Yes, it is. I'll be curling up and going into the doona. So
yeah, appreciate you joining us, Ruth. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And we hope you've enjoyed being with us. Thank you for tuning into this episode. If you'd like to find out more about Jersey Road, the services we offer, you can just Google us, find us across our social media where clips from this podcast will be going out as well. And we hope to catch you on the next one. Thanks very much.